I have the distinct pleasure of being with attorney Andrew Seidel, and you are with Americans United for the Separation of Church and State.
Correct, AU.org.
AU.org. Were you also working with at one time, like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, or Recovering from Religion?
Yeah, I was with FFRF for a full decade before I moved to AU. Yeah,
brilliant. All right, so I read your previous book, The Founding Myth, and I really admired that. I mean, you're a terrific writer, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
I don't read fiction. I only read nonfiction, and I like the fact that you have like this. The index is a whole chapter full of citations. It's amazing how much.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. No, I mean, like, I take a lot of pride in my citations and in getting everything correct, and I actually hired 2 different attorneys for both of these books at 2 points, and I paid them a bounty for every error or misquote or mistake that they could find going through. So they were fact-checking me, and they won prizes for errors. I mean, I paid them in, it was whiskey bounties, but it was still bounties.
So after going through your second book, I mean, and all of the alarming things that you brought up there, and thank you for bringing up all of that detail. It's so frustrating to me, especially like as a Texan. The news media that we have is so deliberately misleading to everyone. I tell my mother today that I'm going to go interview you. She's always my worst example of religious propaganda. My 80-year-old mom. Whenever I go visit her, and I tell her that what the Supreme Court has been doing is to remove our freedom of religion and everything. Oh, I know this, damn Democrats. No, no, Mom.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, but it's impossible to relate to her. She thinks it's everybody but the people involved.
Yeah.
Right. So you really, Mom, you think Amy Coney Barrett is a Democrat, do you? Kavanaugh's a Democrat in your mind? How about? But she doesn't know. She only knows what Fox News tells her. And Newsmax and AON and whatever else that she reads. I was torn going through all of this that you cover, and thank you for bringing up the Satanic Temple there right at the end. I was pleased with that. The reason that I joined that organization, I have no need of religion. I have no need of the trappings or rituals.
Sure.
But I had to show support for one of our few allies in defense of the First Amendment, and especially religious freedom and so forth.
And TST does a really phenomenal job of, I think, highlighting the crusade that I try to explain in the book, or at least the hypocrisy behind it, right? Like, one of the things that I'm trying to argue in here and show everybody is that the goal of what the Supreme Court is doing and what these crusaders are doing is to make religious freedom into a weapon for conservative Christians to impose their religion on everybody else.
Yeah.
And TST, in some of its public challenges, does such a phenomenal job of showing that is exactly what's happening by being that counterpoint. And so I did absolutely want to give them credit in the book there. I wanted to dig deeper into the cases, into some of their things, but there's so much to cover. And it was. You
mentioned a couple of times in the book that if you were to explore all the details of this one aspect, that would be an independent book in itself. And I think you said that 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. I mean, really, any one of the chapters, like the Hobby Lobby case could be a whole book on its own. The Masterpiece Cake Shop case almost ended up being a whole book on its own.
Well, give me this one summary for our viewers, if you would, please. Give me the line 1, line 2, and line 3. Just a simple synopsis of those 3, because you bring those up all the way through the book. Mm-hmm. And my wife joined into the audiobook around chapter 5, so I'm like trying to fill in. You're going to need to know this for the rest of this, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case is the gay wedding cake case. Most people are familiar with it in those terms. It's out of Colorado, and the simple version is we have civil rights statutes in this country that protect everybody's right to be treated equally at businesses. There's state level, there's federal level, and it prevents businesses from putting up signs that say, no blacks allowed, no Jews allowed. These are good laws that we have instituted to prevent discrimination. And in that case, you had a baker, a limited liability corporation, arguing that it had a right under the First Amendment to discriminate against an LGBTQ couple. So again, this is a business, not a person, a business arguing that it has a right to violate laws of the state because of its free exercise of religion and free speech.
And in all of the arguments that you made on this, the Hobby Lobby or whatever it was never the business actually that's even being affected.
Yeah.
It's some guy who is many lines detached, who's just outraged that you did like a chain of connections for the Hobby Lobby thing between the entrepreneur and the insurance companies and all of this, and so somebody gets to take a preventative that is now being used of causing abortions.
Yeah. I mean, that's to me that was one of the most striking examples, because you have citizens were given a right under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, to no-cost birth control. Right. So that is now a right that they have under our law, and you have the Green family come along and say, no, not on our watch. And the Green family owns a series of trusts. Those trusts own stock, all of the stock, in the Hobby Lobby Corporation. The Hobby Lobby Corporation then employs a whole bunch of people, then buys an insurance plan for all of those people. Then some of those people go to their doctor, and in consultation with their doctor, say, I would like to take birth control. Then they go to a pharmacy, get birth control, the insurance company reimburses them, and then they take it. And in all of that, you have the Supreme Court agreeing that the Green family's religious views should halt that way down here level of interaction. It is absurd. And that's where we are now.
There was one thing important that you pointed out, that while it seems that all of this was calculated, I mean, the thing that I found most fastidious is where the Supreme Court knows that they're going to get another conservative justice, so they will postpone hearing certain cases so that they know that they can, in advance, before they even hear the arguments, they know that they can vote the wrong way.
Yeah.
That's...
I think the one thing that I would love for people to take away from this book is that the Supreme Court is not what you have been taught. Right? Like, we have, especially...
It's not what it was.
It's not what it was. So many people have been taught, especially if you ever went to law school. I think lawyers are like the most susceptible to this. We drink our own Kool-Aid. We think of the Supreme Court as the Warren Court, right? The court that gave us Brown versus Board of Education, right? That desegregated the public schools. The court that gave us Gideon versus Wainwright, which says that when the big bad government is accusing you of a crime, you have a right to an attorney to defend you. I mean, that's a big deal. And so you get all these really great decisions out of the Warren Court that truly do protect our most deeply held and basic rights under the Bill of Rights. And that's what we think of the Supreme Court as. But historically, that is not what the Supreme Court has been. It is a conservative, regressive institution for its almost entire history except the Warren Court. And it is now reverting back to that norm, reverting back to the mean.
Unfortunately, our situation is such that we can't talk about this as long and as fruitfully as I would like. But just in summary, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is this has all been orchestrated for decades. It's been the long game,
yes,
right? So
100%.
The ultimate goal being, you said, to and this is the thing that made me an activist 20 some odd years ago, was when people revealed to me their ultimate plan to overturn our representative or our democratic republic and replace it with a theocracy.
Yep.
I found that alarming. I find that alarming that still, when I talk to people today who tell me that they don't even want a democracy, they don't want a republic, they want an autocracy, they want a monarchy, they want a theocracy.
And it is a big part of why I try to explain why we have this crusade in the book. And you're right, there is a small, powerful, very well-funded network of crusaders that are working to shift the law in this manner to move us away from democratic norms with the end goal of being to enshrine minority rule. And the minority being those conservative white Christian men. That's what they're really going for. And theocracy is another way to say that, right? And the reason they are pushing for this radical redefinition of religious freedom, to turn religious freedom into a weapon, is because they're seeing the shifting demographics in this country, right? They are used to a certain amount of power and privilege, and most importantly, deference to their views. And we've seen the rise of the nuns, the NONES, right? We've had our first black president. We have a female black vice president right now, right? And all of these different factors are showing the erosion of their dominant status in our society. And we know for a fact, this is a sociological truth basically now, that when a dominant group is threatened, it turns to ever more authoritarian means of retaining and regaining that status.
When I was a child, we knew better than authoritarianism. I mean, I remember being 11 years old, and the people who in my family now are all super hard right Republicans were telling me then that authoritarianism was evil.
Yeah.
They told me that well, frankly, my family never told me that racism was bad, because my family was exceedingly racist. But many of them told me that Nazis were bad. And now look how many of them are just shifting sides. I mean, like, did we had a war about this 70 years ago, didn't we?
I'm pretty sure we won decisively.
Well, then again, we also had one out like 150 years ago,
Yeah.
just as decisively, and we're still fighting it,
Yeah.
it would seem.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So the only hope that I see, and because the way that you explain this, I mean, you can't argue against it. I wish that I could get other people to read your book. People in my family, I wish I could get to read your book, because all they watch is whatever Tucker Carlson says, and it doesn't matter how many times he admits to being a liar on public airways. They're going to believe everything he says and nothing that I say.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I did write it so that anybody can pick the book up and understand the threat. I think one of the things that I hate about lawyers is that we often write like lawyers. We like to sound like lawyers. And I think that is an exceedingly bad way to try to communicate for the most part. So I wrote this book so that anybody could pick it up and understand the threat. I avoided legalese, I avoided legal tests, I got back to the basics so you can really understand the simple truth underlying all these cases. Because we have been told now that questions of religious freedom and separation of church and state, these are very complicated and they're very hard to get at the answer, and all that's bullshit. These are not hard questions. It's actually pretty easy to answer these. And so I really try to do that in the book.
I understand what you mean. I've had to deal with a lot of paleontological experts, and I want to convey what they're explaining to my audience, but I can't talk about that osteological process. I have to call it an elbow.
Yeah, you have to break it down. Yeah.
Okay, so the one advantage that it seems that we have, well, all of these things orchestrated against us, and as you said, that last tier of line 3, and we never summarized line 1, 2, and 3. I would like to just still do that.
Yeah.
But that last tier of line 3 being just swept away.
Yeah.
The only advantage it seems that we have is that the nuns have outgrown each of the individual religious groups. We haven't outgrown them all collectively, but there are more of us now than there are Jews, than there are Catholics, than there are Protestants. We are talking about minority rule, and that's the only thing in our favor in the age of information, is that we can still, for those who care, we can still verify what information is true and what isn't.
Yeah. And actually, you've hit on the 2 reasons that I do have hope now. Verification, which I will say, we are right, they are wrong. We have truth on our side, and I do not think that is a small thing. I think that does matter. We are fighting for we the people, all the people. They're fighting for the few, the privileged, right? And that means every time they win, they're actually alienating more people. Anybody that's not a conservative white Christian, they are alienating and pushing out, and pushing into our ranks. My personal thoughts on this are that shared values matter more than shared beliefs, and what we need to do is ally with everybody and turn against this minority that is working to steal power. I mean, the reason they chose the federal judiciary, and the reason they sought to capture, and they successfully have, the federal judiciary is because they have lifetime appointments, right? It's a perfect way to enshrine minority rule for a generation, right? You cannot get rid of those judges by anything other than impeachment, and we've seen how high the bar is for that. So, I mean, I do think demographics and truth are the 2 reasons that I have for hope, and they actually are creating a feedback loop that is driving the movement against their aggressive power grabs.
The one thing that I find most remarkable about all of this is, and I don't like to divide people into two clean groups, because I see everything as a bell curve
Continuum,
Yeah, and more or less, where to find any people at the furthest extremes is exceedingly rare. Most people are down in here somewhere. But when you look at if you do have a chance to look at this as just two sides, if you're trying to contrast these two, it does seem to be that you've got one group of people who want everything to be fair and consideration for everybody, and then you have another group that says, no, me.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is the fight. This is the attempt to weaponize religious freedom. Historically, we have long understood religious freedom as an equal right that we all possess, right? Something that protects each of us on the same level. It is an equalizer in a way. Like, we have considered religious freedom the protection for the minority against the tyranny of the majority. And that is what we are seeing turned on its head. That is what we are seeing perverted and weaponized. And it is becoming a tool, a weapon of conservative white Christians to impose their religion on everybody else. And I mean that, like, quite literally. Like, and it goes back to those three basic lines that you were just talking about. Like, they're trying to turn it into a weapon that can harm other people's rights. Religious freedom has never been understood in the history of our country as a justification to violate somebody else's rights. And that is what they are changing, and they're succeeding.
Until we wake the fuck up.
On that note,
Like, where do we go from there?
Yeah, so I'm just going to close it up here. Thanks everybody for paying attention. I will put links into the book below. It's very well written, exceedingly well researched, and my pleasure to talk to you again, sir.
My pleasure.
The previous book, The Founding Myth, by the way, is equally important because it talks about how the lie of our nation being a Christian country was propagated, and he goes into infinite detail in how all of that is bullshit. And the sad thing is, a lot of these people know that it is.
it's one of the most interesting things I've noticed about The Founding Myth is, I started writing that more than 10 years ago now. It was published in 2019. But I have yet to hear a new argument for why America was founded as a Christian nation or based on Judeo-Christian principles. Like, I have not heard a new argument in 9 years, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to end on that previous note. So everybody ignore what just happened since then. So thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.